Uh, Hi everyone, I'm JP. Today I'm going to talk to you about promises and the hardest parts of it, in my opinion. The reason I chose this topic is I had to use promises in my previous projects, and I felt like I missed some of the basics of it during some problems I had during using promises. So I guess I would first start with a basic introduction of it and why we are using them, and then I will talk about the main problems I've had and hopefully help you fix them if you ever have them again or for the first time. So this is the agenda for today's talk. I'll start with the basic concept of promises just as a reminder, and then I'll go to the main part of the presentation, which are the interesting problems I had with promises and how we could solve them. And then I'll show you some of the sources I took this presentation from. So to start, promises A+, calls a promise represents the eventual result of an asynchronous operation. Each promise has a .then method, and they can be either pending, fulfilled, or rejected, meaning that these are the three states a promise can have. Pending promises may change to fulfilled or rejected. Fulfilled and rejected promises must stay in that state, and fulfilled promises must have returned either undefined or a value or another promise, and rejected promises must have a reason why they were rejected. So why should we use them? Why not stick with callbacks? So I guess at first I thought one of the main reasons I was thinking promises were better was the getting rid of the callback hell idea. But then I started studying more about it, and I realized when I was using callbacks at first, I wasn't having much control over the data I was using. So promises allow you to actually return values and throw errors with the .catch method. So that's a huge step from using callbacks to using promises. And this makes it a lot simpler to use to deal with asynchronous operations. So showing a simple example of this, let's say we have a synchronous operation, like the first code snippet here, and you want to log in the console today's weather. That seems fine until check weather is asynchronous. So how would we deal with it with a promise? We would create one promise invoking check weather and use the .then to log .weather since it's already returned from the today's weather promise. So enough with the, Milton thought it would be sunny, but the weather, anyway. And so another example, as I said, a huge step from callbacks is you get rid of these callback chains. So you can read it easier, you can return values, throw errors easier, and make it simpler for everyone to read. So enough with the introduction. I'll go to the most interesting part, I promise. So some of the main problems I've had that I think took me hours during my projects were first, I guess, not using .catch as often as I wish. I would only find why something was not working until I actually realized I wasn't doing .catch, and then I could see the error. That's very basic, but I'm sure some of you had this problem before. Another thing is right after I learned about callbacks and then started using promises, as opposed to it, I was so into the idea of using callbacks that I actually started creating promises that looked very similar to an actual callback. So you can basically create a pyramid of doom with promises and make it very unreadable for a user until you realize it could be just returned and used in the next .then instead of doing a .then from a return value. Another thing, so as a reminder from the first slides, so a promise can either return another promise, a value, or undefined. So in many cases, I was actually using a promise inside of a promise. Like this case, I want to update the user in the first code snippet. And for some reason, it wouldn't work. And then I would realize that first, we're not sure if this user.update on the first code snippet is going to happen prior to the next promise you're trying to create. And second, the next promise you're using has no updated user. So it would actually return undefined. So to deal with it, I guess a good idea is to always return something. If you, even if you don't want to use that data for a next .then, it's ideal to actually think, why am I returning undefined in this case? And another one of the main problems, I think this is the one I had the most, was trying to run many promises at once. I tried already to use for each, for instance, before, and I realized I had this problem like 3 times, and always trying to do it in a better way. So I realized at some point I could use some promise methods like .all, which will take an array of promises and make them all resolve and return these returned values from these promises. So you don't have to be careful of the asynchronous operations of the for each function, for instance. And then in the .then, you can use an array of the array of returns this return thing does. So it makes it a lot simpler. And to close up, I would say a good idea to deal with all of these problems and maybe not have them again in the future is to understand exactly why we use a promise. And I would focus on the idea that you can, why are we using them? Is it just to make it simpler, in not have callback hells or anything? I think we're missing the point of actually being able to return values, catch errors, and also return another asynchronous operation, like another promise. So yeah, that's basically it. If you're still confused, like Milton, you can check on some of these resources I found. The first one, I took a lot of my inspiration from it, because I felt like every time I read it, I would learn something different. And many things are very convoluted until you actually work with them. And that's it.